So today on T-Thoughts, we're going to talk about money. Hopefully my voice doesn't sound too strange because I'm having to modulate it down from a really high-pitched recording. Got some software incompatibilities going on here. Money. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh man, it's going to be boring as hell. Some of us don't want to think about money. But here's the subjects I'm going to push through. First, I'm going to talk about the consciousness of money and how it messes with our brains, because it's completely re-engineered us away from why we exist. Then we're going to dive straight into how it's made, who makes it, where it goes in the system, and how to replace it. Why not smoke a big, fat, whiskey-flavored cigar while I'm doing it, right? All right. Money. Think about why you get up in the morning. Think about why you get up in the morning. Just to make money. Most of us, and I am in this group. I am not holier than thou coming in from the outside staring down at anybody. The game that we're trying to play is to try and find a job that we love that makes the money that we need to exist. That's sort of winning in the 21st century. Well, at least he does what he likes. She does what she likes. It's not bad thinking. Definitely the better of the formulas. And then, of course, we hold people up who win lotteries, who've inherited tons of money, and say, oh, those people are super duper lucky because they don't have to use their brain. And, of course, they die young, rich, and dumb. So money. Am I suggesting that man lived for something else a long time ago? Yes. I am suggesting that for the majority of man's existence on this planet, regardless of what form you think man took in the past, we lived for living. That's what we lived for. We did not live to be animals in cages, looking for a teat to suck to stay alive. Looking for someone over us to survive. I'm sure we'd like people that protected us back in the day, but we did not live for money. For the majority of man's existence, you know this to be true, and you don't need to be an anthropologist or an archaeologist or a historian. You know that for a fact. Man used to get up and get what man needed. Hunt an animal. Or do repairs around the cabin, whatever, around the cave, right? And you might amass some things as you understand what a granary is. Maybe you do some irrigation if you understand, oh, wow, water channeled down the side of the mountain pretty good. Maybe I can make one of those on a flat surface. Whew. But it absolutely determines who we are today. And let me throw this at you. I'll give you a word analogy, but man, does it just hit this right on the head. When you write a movie, there's something called the controlling idea. And that is the one reason why your film exists. It's the one main reason your protagonist is trying to kick the antagonist's ass the whole time. Right? So you're in a big line. Every single word spoken, every action portrayed in the script from start to finish is all controlled by the controlling idea. If it's not serving the controlling idea, or maybe a couple related subplots, you're to erase the line, throw it out of your script. Why mention that, right? That's a little weird. Well, once you write a script, you start thinking this controlling idea on a level that is like astrologically crazy, right? Every thought you have has to dovetail into this. And I mean every single thing in the script's got to be that way. I'm writing a script right now, can you tell? So when it comes to money, that's our controlling idea in society. Every single thing that goes through your head is going through the money controlling idea. And how much do you think that that's screwing up our internal systems? The systems we're supposed to be living off of, that are supposed to live life and explore this universe. Take the contrast of two things. Are you ready? Think about, go out to your favorite vista where you observe the universe, whether it's a beachfront or it's your backyard or it's a lake, wherever. And observe. Try, in my opinion, to observe infinity. Most people believe in aliens fairly out of science. They go, look, of course aliens exist. Come on, it's a gigantic universe. There's trillion infinite planets we can see in the spectrum, blah, blah, blah. Okay, think about that. There's a lot to explore in this universe, isn't there? Hell, look at the palm of your hand. There's almost infinity to explore. Look inside your consciousness. There's an infinity to explore. Why do I keep going on and not getting to a point? Because of this. Think about how money puts bars around all that experience. You are never going to the moon. One, because we can't do it. But two, because you'll never generate enough cash to pull it off. Oh, wow, this new idea, this new construct, this new mechanism by which we live, this currency of water that runs up against banks, this new way of living, which is recent to man, is shutting down your brain. Shutting it down to the point where all those possibilities of what you could do with your intelligence, if you could go do other things and travel the world and experience things that are sanctioned behind elitist money bubbles, they're barriers. You're not getting your chance to live because we're all whores to cash. That sucks. Right? And I'm not woe is me that we got to work. Man still worked. Man still loved the hunt. They loved the satisfaction of building a dwelling, water hole, etc., etc. I'm sure females loved having children and being a mother and being a wife and doing their full-on tasks. And you go to the Midwest, by the way, back in the 1800s, 1850s to 1950s, women kicked ass in the Midwest, all right? They milked the cows, man. They drove a tractor when the old man was sick. I mean, there's nothing a woman wouldn't do that a man did, right? I'll tell you a story. One time I went over to my grandma's house. She was 74 years old at the time, and I can't find her. But I just talked to her on the phone. There's no cell phone. So I just talked to her on the phone. She's like, come on over, I'll feed you lunch. And I'm like, awesome. I think I was visiting in town here. And I went over. I couldn't find her. And finally, I'm walking around the backyard. And I'm starting to get it's a little town, so I don't really worry about weirdos, but it's just really confused, like a Twilight Zone. And she yells at me from a pecan tree in her backyard, I believe. And it's all chopped down now. But she was so high in this frickin' tree, trimming the branches in her polyester slacks and her button-down flowery shirt. I couldn't see her. 74 years old. She'd have to offer me a prize to go up in that tree and do the same job. Money. It's a concept in our minds, and I know that sounds trivial, but think about it. Think about how much, when the controlling idea is to make money, think about how much of the rest of the world you never contemplate, never see. Think about it. It's nearly all of it, because the rest of the universe is infinite, and human beings don't think infinite thoughts, infinite possibilities. Yes, we live in a quantified, start and finish body that is born and then dies and that sort of thing. We don't like stories about the universe unless we can fit them inside nutshells like Big Bangs, right? We've got to break free. This is a slow psychological process to break free. You've just entered the rehabilitation center for breaking free. But the very first thing you need to understand in this rehabilitation clinic of ours in the patio of MK Ultra Radio is that the controlling idea in your life is most likely money, depending on how old you are. Now, obviously, you have a bunch of socialist children growing up with no employable degrees, and they have a problem conceiving of making money because nothing they did in college or high school leads to a career, right? Unfortunately. Now, I keep having these little moments in all the episodes where I say, this is how money's valued, this is how it's made. But then I say, I'm not going to talk about it. So here's a money episode. So here's how it goes, as quickly as I can possibly do it. Obviously, in the past, we had a barter system, and I'm going to focus heavily back on barter before we move on past this one point I'm going to make about how it's created in value. Well, let's just do it right now. When you had a barter system, remember I told you about the controlling idea. The controlling idea is to make these little pieces of paper that are representations of numbers in a computer that represent the calories of energy that you expended to work and gain, to move another machine forward such that they give you back some kickback called money, right? A paycheck. All right. Your controlling idea is money. You don't see the rest of the universe. You don't actually live to the degree you live for money. Now, you can go and make those paychecks and sacrifice the hours into work. That's what I always think of. When I ever have to work for money, It's I'm sacrificing my life away from the infinite thoughts and consciousness of the universe to make the money to go have the infinite conscious thoughts I'm having, right? Which is where deep thoughts comes in. Okay. When we had barter, you married existence to existence between individuals. So I need to exist. So I'm going to go off and I'm going to, let's say I hunt a deer every 3 days for my family. Got enough, venison, to feed my family, right? Okay. But I keep coming up with these skins. All right. Well, I don't need them all. My kids are Fred Flintstone out with these beautiful deer coats. All right. So now I can start selling them because I have a surplus. I dry them beautiful and I take care of them. They don't smell anymore. Rub them down with flowers. So I take it to a market or someone who needs those because he doesn't have either the skills to kill a deer or he simply doesn't have any in his local area. Or he's got different ideas of what to do with them, making moccasins out of them or whatever. So I take it to that guy. And that guy marries his use for what I have, and I marry my use for what he has that I don't have. Maybe he has sugar cane in his backyard, and I want to have sugar once in a while. We exchange things, but the tense by which we exchange in a barter situation is my life fully realized infinite thoughts, and his life fully realized infinite thoughts. And all we're doing is we're exchanging supplies to stay alive. There is no tax man coming down saying, part of your hard work is mine because I've sold you this fucking line of bullshit that the real estate you live on is partly owned by some other person, right? The construct of country and national borders allows this taxation system to exist because you're always supporting some phantom entity that doesn't really exist, right? It's just a piece of paper. And we convince ourselves we have tribalism up to a point where we need to teach everyone how to be in our tribe. And so we finance the tribalism to spread all over the globe so that we never have to deal with anyone who's different than we are. It's weird. But barter maintains a closer connection to who you are as a person than creating a paycheck through labor through someone else. All right. So back in the day, barter was the way that they lived. And then some weird thing happened where man became infatuated with gold. And it was a moment. It was a shiny, sparkly, alien object on planet Earth. You find it and it's kind of a rough thing, but it's got some shiny spots. And you heated it up and man, you can mold it into shapes and then you can push on and prod on it to make it into jewelry and all kinds of stuff. It's this weird, arbitrary, like caveman fascination that we have with gold and silver that got us into this problem in the first place. And, ironically weird, we could use it to fix the problem, but we don't have to. Then probably came a system by which was a very innocent mistake. You started saving these weird objects that didn't have any actual value in life. Well, what do I mean by value? Well, if I gave you something to keep yourself warm in winter, that has value. If I give you food and water, that has value. And if we're trading these commodities back and forth that are strictly related to our real chaotic existence in the universe, infinite thought, right? Sorry about the gestures, Jared. Then we're living in the now. Everything is relevant. Everything that we do in life is relevant from start to finish. But now if we start living for these little bars of nothingness that can't be turned into anything, unless we become an electrician, right? You need some conductive material. So when we start living for these weird things, then we started getting to the point where we were collecting one of the heaviest substances on planet Earth. I think, the atomic weight of gold is like in the 160s, it's a heavy stuff, right? So now you can't sit around carrying it, plus it's a theft problem. A bigger guy could come up, hit you on the head, and be twice as rich as he was before he hit you on the head. And he could just literally make that his job, hitting people on the head with gold. So there needed to be a place to store your gold, and a way to represent that gold in a secure manner, which was where you get the certificate for money situation, right? Okay. You're all familiar with this. It's called money, right? That was put in place probably honestly at the very beginning, and it became a Ponzi scheme later on where someone realized, hey, no one ever spends everything that they have, right? When you don't spend everything you have, you leave your gold in surplus in this bank, right? These are recent terms. They've added currency and bank and all that stuff. So now they could issue more certificates than they really have for the money, and they could make loans. Then they could come up with methods to make money by charging interest. Now, the first part of interest that you all know about is I loan you $1. When friends loan money to each other, there's usually what we call a fixed rate loan, right? A fixed interest, where it's like, hey, I'm going to give you $1, and you're going to give me back $1.10. 10% interest. It's never going to go up. Just give me back the dollar with the 10 extra cents on it. You're cool, right? But then they had something called usury. And this is a compounding interest algorithm where if you don't pay me back in a certain amount of time, I take the 10 cents and I increase it and I increase it and I increase it. And soon enough, you'll have more interest than you actually have what they call principal debt. The actual debt was the dollar. Right? I only borrowed $1. Everything else added to the debt is called interest. Principal refers to the actual debt itself, the real money you actually borrowed. What you received, basically, was the principal, right? Usury became so quickly demonized in the Middle East and Europe that it became tantamount to blasphemy. It was better that you denied the existence of God and deal with that sin than to commit usury on another man. And that's heavy, man. And so the people that actually kept the gold and gave out certificates or anything, jewels, whatever, anything of value, they were called the money changers because they changed gold into certificates and other things, right? And they got to the point where it was actually written in the Bible that, Jesus goes to the temple and turns over the tables of the money changers. Says, get the hell out of my temple. That my house is for God, not for you to make money, which is weird because these guys had plenty of money to make their own building, right? And what's really, really funny, and you all know what I'm about to say is true, is that the people that really prize possessions are very feeble-minded people. So the money changers are these feeble-minded people that have really no infinite thought. They just grew up deprived. I don't know how it happens, but they look at a pile of gold and they just freak out. They just love it. Look how much shiny stuff I have and no one else has this. And they start developing this paradigm in their mind that having this arbitrary material on earth, this mineral called gold or metal, makes them better than somebody else. Look what I've done. Or they don't even care about the rest of the world and they just have more stuff than anybody else. And they don't have an expanded thought to find value in themselves outside of this stuff in a pile. Really weird, right? I stopped to mention that because I want you to remember that the people who have all the money in the world, they're not idiots or anything, but they have that primitive gene in them. And now it's not money. Money is just a mechanism for them to control the world. What they like is power. And it's arbitrary, right? All right. So how's money work today? That was back in Jesus' time. Guy has a box of gold. He gives some paper certificates out. He gives out more than he has gold to back because he knows that nobody actually comes to get all their gold. No one spends all their gold, which is how that works. And so they actually float themselves a bunch of phantom money that doesn't exist. And because they're making a bunch of profit off the interest rates that they're charging, they're actually accruing gold for themselves. They're using it as an investment mechanism. And you might think, well, that makes sense. The guy's got to make money somehow. He doesn't have to make it that way. Nobody has to make money that way. No one should benefit in this world ever, ever, ever by stepping on somebody else to get ahead. And I'm not talking about friendly competition in a sport that doesn't kill anybody. I'm talking about permanently holding someone else back so that you can get ahead. And that's what bankers do every single day. And they laugh every single day, right? We're the cattle, we're the sheep, or whatever they think we are. Peasants. Today, we don't have gold behind our money. Every listener of the show knows that. If you're new, now you know. The world elite didn't like having a limiter on how much money they could create. And the more that people got educated about how money is backed by gold, they hated that knowledge being out there. And so they pushed very, very hard to get the entire world off of a gold-backed currency and onto something they call fiat. But it's fake money, backed by nothing, and it's all on an honor system. For those of you who've heard about the phrase quantitative easing here in America, all that means is the politicians on the top, instead of balancing the budget and cutting spending, print as much money as they want. And every time they quantitatively ease, they put more money in circulation, which brings down the value of all of our money because there's too much. There's a funny story, I've mentioned it several times, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. And at one point, two of the main characters find themselves stranded on a planet full of morons. The primitive man, as a matter of fact, who traveled to Earth on the B-Ark. And the B-Ark was a ship that was designed to get rid of all the horrible humans off their planet, and they sent it to a planet called Earth and crashed, and that's where we are. And at the very beginning of this journey, as caveman was actually going extinct and Homo sapien was taken over, this new race that arrived in a ship, they ended up, they're all morons, and so they ended up using leaves as legal tender. And the joke was it takes 4 or 5 indigenous forests to buy one ship's peanut because everything had no value because there's so many units, right? That's sort of what's going on in the world right now. So now let's say you create this arbitrary money that's backed by nothing. Well, then how do you give it value? How does anybody want to use your money? Well, they created over the last century, and it was solidified in the 60s of the 20th century, something called the OPEC deal. And OPEC, O-P-E-C, is essentially a deal where all the Arab countries in the Middle East who have gold, minus Syria, minus Iraq, minus Iran, everybody's under attack right now. Egypt, Libya, all the ones that got attacked, right, weren't in the OPEC band, and they ended up, the ones in OPEC agreed it will only sell a barrel of oil using United States dollars. All right, America wins for a little while. When you do that, the whole world has to put all of their currencies through our currency, so they're always trading with the United States. The United States became the most powerful country in the world due to that little deal. And then the European Union came along and added the euro to it and broke the OPEC deal to be able to buy oil in either euros or American dollars. Well, guess what happened? The American dollar sank below the value of the euro because Europe's not going to use American dollars to buy oil, right? So in moves the United States Army to take over various regions of the Middle East to make sure that, well, the OPEC deal says you can buy oil from the Arabs in euros, but you know what? We control now, through invasion, through all these bullshit excuses in 9/11, we control, I don't know, 60% of the oil over there. That's not held by countries that we haven't invaded yet. So you can go ahead and buy that 40% with your euro, but we're going to be selling oil at a great price with the U.S. dollar. And so they kind of defeated the OPEC deal by going into the region. And Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote the book The Grand Chessboard and outlined the entire thing with sort of a fake motive. It was sort of a neocon how-to book to get control of all the oil. That's all he talks about in the book is domination through oil control, because that's controlling the money of the world, which controls all the politicians and everyone. Okay. This little scheme has gone on for a really long time. Now, we've talked about the 16th Amendment several times on the show, and I've talked about it on one other episode about how money is actually created in the world to be used. And so this is a very, very important thing. And what's really funny is I have a family member that worked for the Federal Reserve for 20 plus years. Taught economics in college. Okay. When I asked her how money's created, I got about a third of the description of how money's created, and then she literally said to me, I tell my students, then magic happens. Can you believe that? What student would pay for that class, right? How do babies happen? Well, you go to a nightclub and one of you drinks a lot, and then magic happens. Well, thanks, doctor. I'll make sure and deliver the next child in my public transit bus, right? All right. The way it's created is different. I should say this. The way that you and I get money is different than the way that our countries get money. And it doesn't, there's a problem with how we get it too, which is the mind control thing I talked about. Infinite thought goes way down. But when a country has to create it, it's a whole different game. Let's just say we reset the United States of America. There's no Revolutionary War. It's just a reset. And there's no money in the world, and we don't know anything about a good choice versus a bad choice. So what ends up happening is this. The United States of America has no cash at all and needs money. Well, there's a couple ways we could do it at the very beginning. We could dig up all the gold out of our country, out of the ground about all the mother loads, and we had a ton in here when we first started this country. We could put it in a secure vault like a Fort Knox, and then we could issue paper notes against that gold and create a nice supply of units based on our population, right? Every person who's alive and can spend money, right? You could say a baby is the moment you actually start creating the currency, but you could simply say as a person gets to the legal tender age of, like, say, 14 years old, we issue some money into the circulation for that 14-year-old to use, right? They haven't earned it yet. They don't just get it in their pocket, but it's in circulation when they start ebbing into society, right? A limited amount. Someone passes away, we pull amount of money out of circulation, And there's going to be, someone getting born we don't know, and someone who dies we don't know. But overall, we'll have control of the situation as morgues report in people who die and hospitals report people who are born. And, if we got the country back to where it should be, you could have a kid in your house, have it in your back pool, and there'd just be a nice little certificate you get from your state, not turning them into a legal property called a person, right? See the episode of Magna Carta for more details. So we did this for a really long time. We made certificates based on how much gold we had in reserves. But the banks didn't like that because you can't get into debt if you do your books well. You can't get into debt very easily if you have a good monetary system that you control yourself. They wanted to corrupt our money system into a Ponzi scheme that we could not escape, creating a mechanism by which every minute that we exist, we get into debt with them. So here's what they did. There's a guy named Philander Knox, and I've talked about him a couple of times. That's what Fort Knox is really named after. His name starts with a PH. You can look him up on Wikipedia. He was the attorney to the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, and a ton of other folks that took over America in the 1800s. He eventually got appointed into the White House, and I can't remember exactly. He was I think he was some sort of attorney general at some point, and he was the Secretary of State, I believe. Anyway, he got in there right during the, I believe, the Teddy Roosevelt era. They pushed him into the White House because they had a plan. They had created this 16th Amendment, back in the 1800s and tried to push it through in, I believe, 1895, but all of the politicians were hip to the game and said, screw you, European banking CSers, right? Not going to let you in, and they passed on it. Okay, didn't get very far, but they don't stop. As Alex Jones always tries to remind you, the elite don't stop, and now they're getting impatient and they're trying to push the buttons quicker and quicker. So this guy stays in the White House area, the legislative branches, and influences and whips everybody into passing this thing. But it never really passes, which is funny. But it took him all the way up to 1913 with Taft, the first Skull and Bones president, pushing this baby through. But he didn't get it through. He didn't get it ratified. All the 50 states were not in on it. The 2/3 you need to pass an amendment to the Constitution were not on board. A bunch of thugs showed up in states like, I believe, Philadelphia, Kentucky, and Oklahoma, just a few, there's probably more, were actually held at gunpoint to ratify this thing in the court systems and the legislative branches of those states. At least that's how the story goes. Still wasn't getting ratified. So what ends up happening is Taft expires and doesn't get reelected. Plus, he's a giant fat guy. He's totally embarrassing to the system. They went and grabbed a president named Woodrow Wilson, a professor named Woodrow Wilson, and made him president. He had this little controller guy named Colonel Moon that followed him around all the time. I believe I have that name right. So they do a caboose run through the United States because it's 1913, and they drive it all over the United States using the railroads that were paid for by the future cartel members, right? And I'm skipping the whole Jekyll Island thing. If you want to hear a great documentary on this whole thing, look up the Jekyll Island movie made by Bill Still, Still. He made a great film about this. They colluded on an island named Jekyll Island, planned the whole thing, even designed the name to be called Federal Reserve so that you think it's a federal organization. But they did this huge tour around the United States telling everybody that it was ratified. And they did it with William Hearst, I believe. Or was it Randolph Hearst? But they went around the country on this caboose ride with Hearst, the Hearst Corporation, which owned all the newspapers, the majority of the newspapers in the United States, telling everyone that it was ratified. So the world just thinks it's ratified, even though it never really was. And if you subtract all the votes that were put in at gunpoint, you really don't have it ratified. But what this did was it created the 16th Amendment. And it created the Internal Revenue Service, which is the IRS, and it created the Federal Reserve Banking System, and it created this Ponzi scheme by which we got our money. And it goes something crazy like this. The analogy I love to give is the one I just gave to you, which is I loan you $1 and you owe me 10 cents more. And it's fixed. It's cool. That's all I want for my troubles, right? Now, on a personal note, if you never brought me back the $1 and you asked me for another $1, what's going to happen? I'm not going to give you extra money. Or you're going to have to give me a good story why you're going to turn that $1 into $5 and I'm going to make way more money than I originally owned you, but I'm going to use my mind to figure out whether or not you're a criminal. That's a fixed system, and I think that's fairly fair, and it uses the consciousness of man to figure out whether or not the loan is good or bad. But then you have the United States of America with the 16th Amendment. And how does this work? Most of you have heard the story. And if you haven't heard my version of telling it, you're going to have to find a very quick way of telling your friends and family this so they get it. What I like to do is clear off the table. And I say, this table is the United States of America, and there's no money on this table, right? And they go, yes. They go, that means there's no money in the entire world yet for the United States of America. Now, if you forget all the past cool techniques we used by backing it by gold, right? But what happened was, we got suckered into borrowing money from Europe. They get to make money out of nothing, backed by nothing, right? There wasn't even an OPEC deal at the time. They get to print money through our federal mints, making it feel like it's an official federal organization, running it through their private for-profit bank called the Federal Reserve, right? Let's say I would need to borrow $1. And they say, okay. Now, you need to understand that their interest rates are way different than our interest rates. This has nothing to do with the interest rate of the Federal Reserve. I'll try to explain that in a second. They loan you $1. Now, the average percentile low ball percentage from Europe was 36% back in the day. If you were in a time of war, which means they have created a war in the world, and we're going to talk about the history of the world here in a split second here, then they'll jack up their rates to 3,000%. So say I need to get $1 from you, right? Well, during war, it's going to cost me $30 in interest to get that off of them. $30 for $1. Now, here's the thing. If I loan you $1 in this world, you know that you can dig through your sofa, your car, underneath the seats, and you'll find that extra dime that you need. You'll probably find the whole $1 that you borrowed from me, and you could bring it back to me in 2 seconds and go, here's your $1 and here's your extra 10 cents, because you know there's money out there in the world. But remember the tabletop that's clear. It has no money on it. So what we do to explain this to our friends and family is that we get maybe a piece of paper, like a Post-it and a pen, and you say, here's your $1, and I'm going to make you sign this bond between us, this contract between us that you've got to pay me back. And I'm going to say you owe me 10 extra cents on this thing. All right. So you give them the $1, you make them sign the little Post-it, and then you say, okay, now pay me back. Pay me back in full right now. And your family goes, okay, here's your $1 back. And you go, I want my 10% you just signed the Post-it for. And they look at you funny, and they go, well, you didn't, there isn't no 10 cents anywhere. Where am I going to find 10 cents? And you say, exactly. That's how the United States of America has borrowed money, created money, since 1913. Every single bond that we've ever signed, right, to pay back the principal debt that we borrowed from Europe, I don't mean the people, I just mean the banking cartel that's over there, has an interest-bearing bond that cannot be paid back. So they tell you, well, you just need to borrow more money to pay back that debt that you can't pay back because of this Ponzi scheme, right? Ponzi schemes are named after a guy named Ponzi. You figured out a way to screw people like this, okay? Well, you have an infinite cycle that is infinitely crushing, that is crushing that, creating that controlling idea of living for money, because now you have a desperation situation. These individuals in the past have come after us for not paying them, first for not keeping their banks around. The War of 1812 was all about us getting rid of their first European national bank. People are all against national banks in this country. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. We've never had a national bank in this country. When Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, started creating the greenback, he started creating our own money and saying, I don't need to get it from Europe. I'll just make my own money, and has a green label on it instead of a red, or has a red seal instead of a green seal on a really green ink-backed dollar. And we won't owe anything. But what we can get out of our own gross national product, we can pay back ourselves by creating a vibrant country that makes products, right? Here's what happened right after the 16th Amendment was signed. You have Franz Ferdinand, a monarch in Europe, irrelevant to most of the world, gets bumped off. And then his history has dramatized this up that everyone gave a shit about that guy dying. And, of course, it kicked off this well-funded war between all the countries in Europe. And America completely stayed out of it until the last second. And Europe, with their Hearst-controlled papers, it's not just Hearst, it's the guys over there, wrote articles about us saying that we're xenophobes and we're assholes for not sending our kids over to die in Europe. So we pretty much stay out of everything until about 1917. And then we put our boys on boats in really horrible, tight conditions, unsanitary. You have, stool floating in the bottom of these boats, all dressed, they're not fed well, so the nutrition's down, their immune system's down, and what happens? A little side note for you. The influenza virus mutated in them. The influenza virus, just a little footnote for you, when you get the flu is a virus that's controlled population of all creatures on Earth since creatures existed on Earth. The way it mutates is simply by being exposed to other strands of the same virus. It mutates when it has overexposure with itself, and it mutates into a form that starts killing the host. Now, obviously, we have techniques of getting around the flu all the time, and a lot of people think they have the flu when they don't. They have the cold, but they always say flu, and they always take a bunch of flu medicine, but they really just have a cold. It's a nasal congestion bacterial issue, right? Whatever. But the flu that killed 30 million people in Europe after World War I, starting during the last few years of World War I, was due to, I think, through reading a bunch of papers, our soldiers going over there with fully mutated strands of flu. When you hear about bird flu over in Asia, it's simply because the birds are overpopulated. When they land to procreate and land to move around and migrate, the close proximity of too many birds mutates the flu, and then we get a problem. But the reason why Franz Ferdinand was bumped off was to kick off a huge loan fest with the United States to Europe, but we stayed out of the picture. Now, I think historically speaking, we weren't strong enough to really get into World War. And it really wasn't a World War until it incubated up and, again, continually gets financed. No wars can exist unless bankers finance them. So bankers could bring peace on this planet if they'd stop funding wars. No one would fight. They're always hanging on to the little bit of resources they have, right? Yes, you get some. Genghis Khan didn't have a European cartel behind him, but he still crawled across the entire continent, right? All of us have some Mongol blood in them, right? We go over, we spend about a year and a half over there, and the war's over, and we declare victory. Okay. Then you have the 1920s. The 1920s is known as the Roaring Twenties, and the Roaring Twenties was not the Roaring Twenties. It's called the Roaring Twenties so that we don't pay attention to what actually was going on. Most people lived a completely normal life in the Roaring Twenties. The peasants of the world, you and me, we thought the Charleston was the bomb, right? And music was exploding, and culture was finally metabolizing in this country, and we had Art Deco, beautiful stuff happening on this planet. That was our golden era. But the richest families from Europe that moved to the United States and set up shop were busy being suckered into bad investments that European banking cartel people came over and offered them. So they were offered all these volatile, horrible investments throughout the 20s, designed to take down, again, it's a plan. First you co-opt the money, you start a war. The war didn't go as well as they wanted to, so then they go after all the families, saying, well, we have to get rid of these rich families because they have money to rise up against us. They have money to educate themselves and point the finger and say, look at those European guys doing that. So if they're broke, they don't get a voice. They can't just influence an article here and there, right? This goes all the way to 1929. It's 1929, you have the crash. You have all these guys supposedly jumping out of buildings, committing suicide. They were thrown out of buildings because they knew who the hell was doing what. But the elite of the world, controlling our money, retracted out of circulation, as I'm told, about 4/5 of all the money in the United States was taken back one morning, and that caused the crash. When you have a car loan at your house, you have a payment booklet, right? And it's got a schedule. You send in the payments, Well, now imagine there's a little clause in the bottom of your car contract that says, well, you know what? At any moment, just in a matter of dire situation, we can call you up and demand that you come up with all the money in your payment booklet. Well, what if that happened? We wouldn't have the money to pull it off in most cases, right? So that's what happened to all these millionaire families here in America. They got their loans called in, and they didn't have the money. So all the assets that were left around as collateral for the loans were called in, and they were broke. Their homes, their real estate, their possessions, all called in. That was the kickoff step for the Depression, but the Depression took a little while to incubate. All right? What happens to a country when the richest people in the country can't employ anyone? Not in their homes, not in their factories, not anywhere else in the world. They can't make investments in brand new shoe shops or whatever, right? Because remember, we weren't working on corporate dole back in the 20s, not on average. All right. So here's the deal. Over the next 4 years, from 29 to 33, everyone lost their jobs. The reported unemployment rate was around 26%. We can assume that was at least double. Sort of like the unemployment rate in America right now is actually probably triple, if not quadruple, what the White House is willing to say. And that just came out a week ago. They're saying, there's 90 million Americans not participating in the workforce. That's called unemployed, right? So they crashed the economy in the United States, and of course, Theodore Roosevelt, another skull and bones guy, comes in. He's the crippled guy with the polio in the wheelchair, right? He comes in, and by the command of the world elite, outlawed the ownership of gold in the household. And there's various exceptions to where you could keep your gold, but most of it had to be confiscated, especially if you had any bars, if you had any coins, it all had to be confiscated. It was illegal for you to own sovereign property called gold. Insane. They harvested up all the gold, said they were sending it over to Fort Knox, which is supposedly named after some naval captain guy or whatever. It's named after Philander Knox for putting in the 16th Amendment in the first place, being the master architect of it all, and pursuing it through the system as a whip, right? Now they know no one has any money for real. Everyone in the country has had real money forbidden and fake money made legal. Well, in the middle of the night, over the course of several years, all that gold that was shipped to Fort Knox was shipped someplace else. We assume a bunch of it went to Europe on boats, and a bunch of it probably went to New York City to be protected in the vaults of New York, which is where it exists to this day. Okay. Well, this is starting to sink in here. We will get to replacing it in 1 second here. Okay. So, in the meantime, they're building up a guy named Adolf Hitler. They're paying for him. They're designing him. The inside word is he's actually the grandson of a Rothschild because his mother actually had sex with, his mother was, I believe, I think it was his mother, not his grandmother, but his mother was a maid of a Rothschild and ended up getting pregnant out of wedlock, and here he is, right? His grandmother was Jewish. Weird. Austrian-based. They mentor this guy up over the 20s and 30s. He writes Mein Kampf, which is probably not his doing, but it's his manifesto to control the minds of all the Germans. He uses a bunch of the suffering in Germany that was a result of World War I being lost by the Germans, where their economy was worth nothing, okay? You have Germany in a state where they start inventing this phrase saying it takes a whole life savings to buy a postage stamp. That's how utterly useless the Deutschmark was back in the day. Well, during this moment of absolute economic suffering, the Nazi Empire builds itself up, seemingly out of no money because their country doesn't have any economy. A bunch of the arsenal that they built, the guns, the tanks, the airplanes, missile technology, all that stuff using American-made products and European products that continue to be sold to them throughout the entire World War II. Now, we'll go into the full history of Hitler, but what we believe to be now, by analyzing the forces that were exerted on Europe at the time, you had the ruling class existing in various places in Europe, a big Club 300 in France, where they, it was, the Rothschilds took up root in Frankfurt, Germany, and then I think moved a lot of their stuff over to Paris. But they were being threatened by Russia. Russia was saying, look, we're building up a gigantic conventional army, and we're going to roll over you guys and take everything, because we can. So they built up the Nazi forces under the leadership of one Adolf Hitler to push him back. And it was very similar to when Napoleon tried to push back the Russians. He lost pretty much his whole army doing it, right? Simply because the terrain is too intense and the weather's too crazy. But Hitler starts taking over all the countries in Europe. And Americans give the French a bunch of crap for rolling over when the Nazis rolled through. Here's what you don't know on average. They were meant to roll over because they wanted the Nazi occupation to be in every single country of Europe. The ruling class did. They paid for him, right? Even Prescott Bush financed the Hitler through the Union Bank of London until 1942 when they came in and said, if you continue doing this, you're going to jail. All right? They wanted to push back and injure Russia. We stay out of the game forever, right? And there was nothing they could do to convince us to go over and fight Nazi Germany, which I'm not quite sure why. I didn't live back in the era. But the one event, the catalyzing event that got us into the game was starting a fight with Japan. We embargoed, meaning we blocked all of the passage of their strategic resources like oil deliveries and that kind of stuff with our naval fleet. And somehow, in doing this, a naval maneuver to embargo them, they brought down an armada of naval ships. There was 2 gigantic naval fleets protecting Pearl Harbor and all of Hawaiian Islands because it was a staging area for us, right? And if you've been to Hawaii, you'll see all these bunkers that they built on the hills that are now relics that we go look at, but that's from the military that used to exist at that time. They told both the Navy captains, which are like generals, right, and all the other branches, to move their fleets way out to the east and west, allowing this column to come down from Japan to orchestrate Pearl Harbor. This is all above ground knowledge now. Even my stepfather, who's a professor who doesn't believe in any conspiracies, knows this one to be true and reported back to me. He actually found the data. We know it's true because both naval captains were given the naval equivalents of the Medal of Honor, and their families have now shown that to the world. But it was orchestrated to kick off this event, this Pearl Harbor, so that we would go and start the battle on 2 fronts, on the Nazi front and the Japanese front. Now, you know how many people, it was like 60 million people died total worldwide as a result of that war. So we experienced this depression all the way through the 30s and all the way through the first half of the 40s. Then, as you know, everybody was defeated. The atom bombs dropped. It closes off the war with Japan. We'd already settled things with supposedly a cyanide capsule eating Adolf Hitler, which we think now he lived in Argentina until the 60s. Everybody escaped. Everybody who was anybody in the Nazi war machine escaped. Either came over here and formed the NASA and added lots of candidates to the CIA, forming the MK Ultra program. This show's kind of nicknamed after, right? In case you don't know, I'm Mark, and my co-host is Kyle. So that's why we got the MK Ultra radio. So right after that, we sense this relief. The war is over when we get into the baby boom generation, and the rest is pretty much normal history of us constantly being in some war front forever, right? You know, there's a reason for everything. All right. Now, again, that was a big lone fest. The whole thing was to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Hitler was only supposed to go up to a certain point, and no one knows if Hitler actually... there's evidence to say that Hitler actually figured out he was being manipulated and controlled and started killing off the arms that were invading his realm. And the History Channel even has an episode where Hitler was listening to a psychic his whole life, and he actually took the psychic out in the woods and had him murdered. We think that was a handler from the elite. You know, a psychic would be someone who could predict the future, right? Well, if I was the world elite and I said, look, you go here, give this speech, and this is going to happen, that's going to happen, and they're right because they're funding all the changes that happens after speeches, and they know what to say to manipulate people because they're good at that, right? That's where we think he may have broke off, and that's where I think they had to get rid of him anyway because he was going crazy with all of his elitism and Aryan worship and all that kind of stuff, right? So now we're stuck in the system. We're stuck way, way, way in the past with this crazy fiat currency. So what do we do today to get rid of it? That's the big question, right? The 2 things you can do in your own world very, very quickly is to teach people about that 10 cents on the dollar loan and show them the bond system that doesn't work. Once their mind is blown, you need to then tell them that the Federal Reserve is a private bank. Now, I said this in the European Union episode, and I apologize for the repeat, but again, I have to put this in a container so it's like a volume out of an encyclopedia, right? When they formed this idea on Jekyll Island, and again, Bill Still's documentary is going to be an amazing source for you guys. I think you have to buy it still, and you should buy it because he's a good guy. He's still caught up in paradigms and believes you can vote your way out of the problem, but whatever. He's a good guy. He means well. They knew that to create a bank, you have to have initial investors and initial money in the system. And so 90% of the ownership of the Federal Reserve was actually these banking cartel people. They're sometimes referred to as the member banks, but there's also member banks of the Federal Reserve that don't have anything to do with the control structure, and that's where the interest rate comes in. Okay. So you need to basically make sure that they understand that the Federal Reserve is private for profit. 10% of that ownership was us putting our gold in, which was then sent to Europe. The 90% of the people that were left actually used the system to print money out of nothing to pay for their 90% of the investment. Absolutely insane, backed by nothing. They made up themselves as owners. Imagine going to Apple Computer and saying, I'm going to own 90% of Apple Computer. And they go, well, geez, how do you think you're going to do that? And they go, I'm going to use your printers to print money to say that I own 90% of your company. And they go, oh, okay. That's how insane the actual foundation of the Federal Reserve is. It's a crime the way the Federal Reserve was actually formed, let alone operates in this country. All right. Now, some of you are aware of the Bitcoin thing that just went around. It's dead, right? You never hear about Bitcoin anymore. When you go to purchase things online, the Bitcoin options may exist, but most of them are offline, okay? The cool thing about Bitcoins was it was a virtual fiat currency, but they limited its quantity. They said of Bitcoin, which is a brand, right? You might say, give me a Kleenex. Well, you know Kleenex is actually a brand. It's just they were there first, and so they get to co-opt the name of the object, right? But there's all kinds of Bitcoins. It must be 36 different Bitcoins, right? With varying levels of currency and use. Let's just stick with Bitcoin. Bitcoin proved and freaked out the world, freaked out the ruling class, that the people were going to catch on to the fact you could create a brand new currency out of nothing and it immediately has value, especially if you limit its currency quantity, right? And so that's why it had to be crushed. And boy, did they ever crush that place, right? Gotta hurry up because I'm losing my light. By the way, if you're ever watching this on a video and I start losing my light and the video's quality starts going down, I look over bright because I've applied a filter to try to lift it out of darkness so you can still see me in the video. So, can we replace our money with something fiat, but something limited in quantity that has infinite value? And the answer is yes, absolutely. What we need to do as citizens of the world is we need to go into each one of our countries, okay, and we need to shut down any equivalency of the Federal Reserve in your country. Anything that we get money from an outside agency that is not 100% federal to your country, right? And we just need to limit its quantity. And I'm telling you right now, the way that you determine the limit is to count your population of indigenous, citizens of your country, not the immigrants, right? You have to handle immigrants differently. It's going to put a different spin on immigration because when you absorb an immigrant, you're going to have to add the currency. But you know what? That'll even work for immigrants too. You won't lose the value of your money having a ton of immigrants come in because it's quantified to the amount of people you have who are at the tender age that you can spend money. You know, it might be that a parent gives their 8-year-old some money to buy candy. It's still actually acting on behalf of the parent for their child. But once their child gets to a point where they're allowed to spend money, which I think 14 is a pretty decent age, right? I wouldn't debate hard at a younger age. Then we can start moving forward. So what do you do with all this existing debt out there? Well, you're going to have to do a couple things. In America, if we're to replace our money, we need to repeal the 16th Amendment right away. But before we do that, we have to outlaw usury. I propose a zero amendment to the Constitution of the United States and to any constitutional body out there in Europe. The zero amendment that needs to go out there to every single country is to forbid any type of compound interest ever, ever, ever. It needs to be taught like the Holocaust. It needs to be taught as the demise of mankind in world history. It's to never be allowed. Anyone ever caught doing it has to suffer the greatest punishment, probably not death, but definitely incarceration, potentially for the rest of their lives. Or if you think you can make amends in a shorter period of time, then you slap them on the hand and you put them back out in the public. But with no uncertain terms, you do it again and you are gone off the planet. No one will ever see your flesh again, right? Your family will think you disappeared off planet Earth. That's how bad usury needs to be punished in this world. Okay, that's the First Amendment. Second one for us is to abolish the 16th Amendment and all structures that came into place as a result of the 16th Amendment, which I don't mean to I mean, I'm not pussying out of it, but I'm just saying we'll need to collect taxes in every one of the countries to exist. But that entity that's linked to these elite bankers, for us as the Internal Revenue Service, we would have to actually reform a national bank that is not attached to anything but what I just told you. This new system that performs like Bitcoin, that's using fiat currencies to create value in the world that we can use as monetary units, right? Now, let me suggest one that's my own opinion, which is I think we need to take anyone who's ever acted in a banking capacity, and I would go all the way down to the teller. If you've ever worked for a bank that engaged in usury, no hard feelings, but you can never work in banking again for the rest of your life. You're bonded away from banking for the rest of your life. If you're a loan officer, a bank president, a bank manager of a private for-profit usury bank, you're just out of the game. You got to go find another career. Go teach economics the good way, if that's what you need to do. Because you can never work at a bank, because we have to keep these people out who are potentially brainwashed by the system. We need to find brand new employees. Talk about brand new jobs across the United States. It'd be fantastic, right? Once you knock out the private for-profit mechanism out of banking, you no longer need to make a gigantic profit. It's like a function of society. It's a strategic resource. Money is a strategic resource, and anything that's a strategic resource in the world, water, air, food, you got to be very careful about how profit models are lumped onto these things, right? Free market's great, but strategic resources are different. The CEO of Nestle coming out and saying that water shouldn't be an alienable right of man, that guy should be hung up by his neck. Seriously, you're telling every man that they got to buy water? You serious? Who the fuck are you that you would tell me I can't get water, right? Try that in a dark alley at night where you try to tell a bunch of bros coming out of a bar they can't have water unless they buy it from you. Let's just see where that goes, right? That's what you deserve for saying a stupid statement like that. Okay. So here's the thing. You're probably thinking, well, I got a loan on my house, a loan on my car. How the hell do I handle that if we're going to replace our money? Well, what if I told you that the new policy is to say that whatever you've ever paid back on that loan is credited to your loan immediately? Now, you don't get a refund check, so if your house cost $100,000 and you paid $250 in a long-term 30-year loan or something like that, you don't get the money back, but let's just say you own your house. Isn't that a good news? No more payment booklet for any of those products. If you bought a car for $14,500 and you ate some horrible financing and it's $18,000 and you've already paid the $14,500, you own your car. Boom. That is from your country to you, and we have a military-industrial complex that can be recharted to protect that one objective. Talk about giving them a purpose. If the military ever wanted a purpose in the world, they could just say, look, your new charter is to chase anybody that ever took money from Americans. You're to chase them all over the world. You know, they're not allowed to do this to anyone ever again. It was a crime to begin with, and they've committed crimes against man. They've created suffering. How many people have died to a lack of money? Well, those individuals are responsible for that death, and we just have to get real about it like that, right? I'm losing my light, so I'm going to move a little bit quicker here. Let's just say that you want to protect yourself against corruption ever seeping in the future. So if we create a few constitutional amendments and a few precautions like taking everyone out that's ever been in charge of banking in the past, and we put all these regulations in to treat our money like a Bitcoin, it's all sovereign money we print ourselves, not linked to anyone else, that's a pretty damn good start. But let me suggest one last thing that we can do, and that is to deflate the amount of units it takes to buy anything. Right now, well, I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, a Corvette was $7,500. The movie Corvette Summers came out with Mark Hamill. Man, everybody was into the two-tone black and silver pace car for the Indy 500. That thing was anywhere from $7,500 to $10,000. Today, that car is almost $100,000. You buy the top of the line Corvette, and you're over 100 or just about 100. Well, corruption can exist if the paycheck is really huge. Remember that old thing where the movie Office Space, where they put a little interest-bearing, it was a real scam that was done in the 70s, and probably even before that, but some people actually created programs to siphon off fractions of a cent into an account that eventually, over the course of 10 years and billions of dollars going through these software packages, ended up becoming millionaires. And some people got away with it, and some people got caught. Of course, they got caught by people who were criminals, which is sort of funny. But what if we reverse the amount of money that you need? My grandparents always told me they could go out to a movie and dinner for about 15 cents, two people. I think that's cool. And it's not just to create that little era in history. What we want to do is we want to make dinner and a movie cost about 15 cents, because then anyone who's trying to seep in corruption into the system, say we don't cover all the loopholes because we're not aware of how brilliant they are in doing this. Remember, it's their game, not our game, so we have to assume they're the experts, we're the neophytes. If we build a new system, it's going to have to catch them all, right? So what we have to do is deflate our currency, and brace for this, right? What would a dinner and a movie cost today? In California, a decent dinner is going to be about $60 for two people, and your movie is going to cost you $30 to $35. Two $12 tickets plus all the food and crap you shouldn't eat, but that's what you're going to be paying. So almost $100 to get out the door for a decent date, right? I mean, that's a high-end date. Someone you really like. Crush that to 15 cents and rethink everything. If your waiter were to upcharge you $1 on that $60 meal, you wouldn't even see it. Unless you're super anal retentive. They take your tea that's $3.25, which costs nothing to make, and they make it $4.25. But you're at a nice restaurant, you're like, hey, it's my privilege, it's my show-off tactic to say how much money I have. What if that 15-cent meal all of a sudden was 16 cents? Oh, corruption looks a whole lot different, doesn't it? You can immediately see corruption. There's no fractions of a cent because a cent is worth a lot. And you think about our pockets. You know, you wouldn't carry big wads of cash. You could actually carry coins again. Printed money would be for buying a house, buying a car, something big, right? So I think that after we secure the cash, we secure its quantity, we secure the way it's managed, we pull it back. So I know what some of you are thinking. You think, well, how does anyone make money making money, giving out money? Well, hopefully it's obvious. Nobody does. The government, which would control all the loans, would have a fixed rate of profit for small loans, especially, and essentially you'd have a loan rating, not a credit rating. You'd have, are you good at paying back your loans? Can you do what you say? Just like you would handle with your buddy, right? Now that guy, don't give that guy any money. He always borrows money, never brings it back. Maybe you feel sorry for him and cut him $1, but you know you're never going to get it back, right? That's the way the government needs to do it, except there's no freebies, right? What if somebody came in and said, well, I'm going to have to, even if it's 15 cents to go out for two, I'm still going to have to borrow $50,000 from my big giant corporation to float a payroll, to invest in a wing on the side of my company, to buy new manufacturing equipment, to hire a bunch of people. How does that work? And I'll say it like this. When you go into Hollywood and pitch a film, all right? Let's say I pitch a film and I want to be a first-time director, and they like everything that I've done. They like my storyboards, my treatments, my script, everything, right? They say, kid, we're going to invest in you. Let's say I do it at Sony, MGM. Well, Sony has a gigantic movie-making machine, and people that have been on the payroll for 20, 30 years, they know exactly how to make a movie. They push my brain trust into that group, and they attach to me the top dogs of everything, casting, directing, or not directing if I was the director, but casting, cinematography, special effects, production design, everything, right? All A players that have made great films in the past. I'm the only variable in the equation. That's you borrowing money on a big scale to build a company. But what does the studio make from the whole thing? They make the huge dividends and the paybacks when the tickets sell, when the product does well, the DVDs, the streaming products, they make all the money from it. Now, it doesn't have to be like that for you, but what you can do is a bank could essentially say, look, all right, you're doing this thing. Let me look at your staff. Let me view kind of who are the players in your game. And they notice there's some C and B players, and they're like, okay, so here's the thing. We're going to attach to you everything that you need to form your company. The very best accountants, the very best corporate attorneys, all this kind of stuff. It's going to be part of your loan. You're going to have to spend your money to use our people, so they're going to get paid through our money. But what that guarantees us is you have the highest odds in the world of succeeding. What we want back from this is a dividend up to a fixed amount of money. So you're going to borrow $50K. You think you're going to turn that $50K into, say, $100K a profit. All right. What if they said to you, look, we want our $50K back, the principal, of course, and then we want, in this new world, I'm just going to make this up, $10K more in dividends. So every time you earn $1, you cut a dividend check, which is a profit-sharing check, to the bank. Since their accountant is cutting the check anyway on the payroll of the loan that you got from the bank in the first place, there's no hocus pocus, there's no hanky-panky on the books. They're guaranteed to get the check exactly on time, and there's no hidden books or any, profits that are being concealed. Banks would turn into federal agencies that would invest in you just like any other big player in the world. And that's what we need in our monetary system, is that level of support and engagement and codependency on each other to make it work. Debt needs to be erased in the brain, because debt is something that is just, you're convinced you have. Now, if I loan you the buck and you owe me 10 cents more, we've agreed on that debt, and I have a little piece of paper that says you can do it, but there's a mechanism to pay that back. And if we have a fixed amount of monetary units in the world, then your company could generate a profit selling a product, and you'll harvest those out of people's personal allocations, right? Then they'll go back to work and make money and replenish their thing from the allocation. There's always enough money to do it. Economics alone, with a fixed number of units in the economy, becomes a very simple game, because you could literally predict how many units you could get out of a human being for your cost of your money versus how much money's in circulation, etc., etc. This is just a crude example, and I wrote an article on OnePageNews.com called Replacing Your Money, if you want to get into the super duper details of it all. But this is pretty much it. We need to get to a national bank for every single sovereign country, get out of any EU. Less national borders we have, the better, right? We need to get back to human beings with infinite thought, not being constrained by the controlling idea of making money. But if the system gets to the point it's sort of ubiquitous, it's sort of just integrated into your existence, that you don't think about it constantly. Once we have a fixed system where the country isn't going into debt constantly, any taxes that we agree to be taxed on can go back into education. States could make certain states phenomenal, right? When I went to school in Massachusetts, I got my ass handed to me in their school systems. Back to the Midwest, I was acing again. It was crazy, because they had different regiments of education. Now, we should want everyone to have as much education as possible, but I did pretty good going back to the Midwest. But I flunked 7th grade. Even though I got a chance to continue going into 8th, and I just retook the classes that Kansas thought was necessary, which was English, I moved through the system, and I did really, really well after I came back. And so that can be us managing our money intelligently. So this light is almost completely gone. I'm going to be talking with nothing to show you. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. I might loop back on this a little later with more advanced concepts, but I think you get what I'm saying. This is the stream of consciousness that we need to inject into man's mind. Again, this show is about putting the mind back in mind control, right? Or the anti-shill force in your life, that these concepts will undo all the hundreds, if not thousands of years of bad thinking that's been allowed to metabolize and fester in our minds, right? We have to undo it. So let's do that, right? If you haven't been already, go to mkultraradio.com. All the links are at the top. That's all I'm going to say. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. Learn the rules that rule you. Take care of yourself and somebody else.